Orders of the day.
Ballot item number 47, private member's notice of motion number 46. Ms. Malhi.
The member from Brampton Springdale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that in the opinion of this House, the Legislative Assembly of Ontario should reaffirm our commitment to the values that we cherish: justice, human rights and fairness, and condemn all forms of communal violence, hatred, hostility, prejudice, racism, and intolerance in India and anywhere else in the world, including the 1984 genocide perpetrated against the Sikhs throughout India, and we call on all sides to embrace the truth, justice, and reconciliation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Ms. Malhi has moved private member's notice of motion of number 46. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the member has 12 minutes for a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to begin by thanking all of our guests who have joined us today, and I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge my colleague from Bramley-Gore-Malton for all of the hard work that he's done towards the 1984 issue. Today, we recognize the human rights, social justice, reconciliation, and healing of the events that took place in New Delhi and other cities across India in 1984. They turned their backs not only on the Sikhs, but every Hindu and Muslim family that risked their lives to shelter their Sikh neighbours. The province of Ontario is a place where people see democracy as a way to recognize the past of our neighbours, and the violence that took place in 1984 can only be described as a genocide. While we can't change the events of 1984, we have an opportunity here today to clear the misconceptions that divide the community and the residents of Ontario. Sikhism was founded in 1469 in Punjab, the land of 5 rivers in northern Ontario, with the birth of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, Guru meaning teacher and leader. Guru Nanak Dev Ji was the founder of Sikhism and was born to Metu Kala, Akalu and Mata Tripta in the now called Nankana Sahib near Lahore. Guru Nanak said that people should be distinguished by what they did rather than what they wore. Nanak continued to demonstrate a revolutionary spiritual streak. He argued that things like pilgrimages and rituals were far of less spiritual importance than internal changes to the soul. The Sikh people are proud Canadians and Ontarians with origins as Indigenous people of Punjab. For centuries, they lived in Punjab, dating back to the time of their gurus prior to British invasion. The Sikh people had their own nation, state encompassing both East and West Punjab and Kashmir. The establishment of the Sikh Empire under Maharaja Ranjit Singh is commonly considered the zenith of Sikhism at a political level. During the Sikh Empire came to include Kashmir, Ladakh, and Peshawar. Hari Singh Nalwa, the commander-in-chief of the Sikh army, along with the northwest frontier, took the boundary of the Sikh Empire to the very mouth of Khyber Pass. The Empire's secular administration integrated innovative military, economic, and governmental reforms. Sikhism is a monastic religion founded during the 15th century in the Punjab region by Guru Nanak Dev Ji and continued to progress with 10 successive Sikh gurus, the last being the teachings of the Holy Scripture, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. The philosophy of Sikhism is covered in great detail in the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the Sikh holy text, and detailed guidance is given to followers on how to conduct their lives so that peace and salvation can be obtained. The holy text outlines the positive actions that one must take to progress in the evolution of person. One must remember the Creator at all times. It reminds us that that the soul is but a part of the whole that is God, who is ever merciful, and that the follower must dedicate their life to all good causes to help make this life more worthwhile. Sikhs believe in the following values: equality, personal right. They believe that actions count, and living a family life, sharing and accepting God's will. Sikhs have contributed immeasurably to the social fabric of Canada and of Ontario. From the watershed moment when my father was first elected as the first Turban Sikh Member of Parliament, and now we've come to a diverse representation of Sikhs here in Ontario, and we have 4 federal Sikh ministers in all parties. Sikhs are active in all walks of life here in Canada, whether it be economics, business, or politics. So now I wanted to share a little bit of a brief history about Sikhism and Sikhs, but now I want to talk a little bit more about 1984. The intentional and deliberate nature of the attacks on Sikh lives, properties, and places of worship during 1984 makes them a crime of genocide, as defined in Article 2 of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The article defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethical, racial, or religious group, as such killing members of the group, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group, or deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcefully transferring children of the group to another group. The Genocide Convention is sometimes misinterpreted as requiring the intent to destroy in whole a nation. Some genocides may fit that description, but most do not. Most are intended to destroy only a part of the group. The Genocide Convention specifically includes the intentional killing of a part of a group as a genocide. Those who shrink from applying this term, genocide, usually ignore the in part. The ensuing destruction and the loss of life, including the massacres in November of 1984, marked one of the darkest chapters of the later 20th century for the Sikh community. Simply put, as recognized by many leading international human rights organizations, the 1984 genocide of Sikhs was a series of acts of genocide directed against Sikhs in India that had an effect on Sikhs around the world. On November 4th, in 1984, the Delhi police officials claimed to have arrested 1,809 people on charges of looting, rioting, and arson. Despite the killings occurring throughout Delhi, no arrests had been made for murder. Within a few days, the police released all but around 60 of the people arrested. In January of 1985, the Home Minister claimed that 4,579 suspects were arrested in Delhi. India's Information Minister stated that there had been a total of 30 convictions and 14 police officers had been punished for dereliction of duty. 642 of 707 criminal cases ended in acquittals or were cancelled because the state allegedly could not trace the accused. Sikh mothers, fathers, sons and daughters across Punjab, Delhi and other parts of India were all roped into these events. They were burned, raped and killed in many fashions. Today we have a victim here, Mrs. Guman, who was a victim of communal violence and lost her husband to communal violence. I want to thank you for coming here today. And she had to struggle to raise her family on her own, to raise her 2 children without a husband. And when I talked to her, she talked about her story, about not having support. Nobody wanted to help you in fear that if they helped you, that they might be the next victim. Balbir Singh, I have another great story of an Ontarian, of a Canadian. Balbir Singh, the son of a core mat maker, was a resident of Tilokpuri. His father was killed by a mob. He escaped by wearing women's clothes, and even now Balbir is afraid to reveal that he is a Sikh. He is still scared of growing his hair long and wearing a turban. He says, "I have nightmares about the way my father, Jyota Singh, and my uncle were lynched. I was just 14 then, and living in Tilokpuri, where we made core mats at home. And when the news came of Indira Gandhi's murder, and riots broke out, I remember my father saying that Delhi was the capital and violence would be contained soon. He said nobody would attack us since we were poor. And when the mob came, the police assured us that they would not allow them to enter our area and told us to return home. For we saw an even larger mob approach us with crowbars and cans of kerosene. They started beating all the men and abused them. I, along with my mother and 3 brothers, hid in my uncle's house. My mother had dressed us all up as girls so that we were spared." He saw his father die in front of his very eyes. Everybody was killed, and they went to the neighboring village where a milkman gave them shelter. This is just one of the stories and legacies of your fellow Canadians who are Sikhs and living in Ontario. This motion is one of both not forgetting and honouring, but also of recognizing and naming 1984 as a genocide. India's Interior Minister Rajnath Singh in December of 2014 described the events of 1984 and acknowledged them as a genocide. The several persons who had a role in the carnage are not yet punished. This House has taken similar positions when it recognized past genocides such as the Holocaust, the Holodomor, and the Armenian genocides. I strongly urge all of my colleagues here today to support this motion about the genocide of Sikhs in 1984. I stand in solidarity with the community and many Canadians across the country seeking justice. When innocent lives are lost with no accountability or explanation, we have an obligation as residents of Ontario to ask why and seek honest answers for our citizens. As we gather to remember November 1984, I remind residents of Ontario and Canadians that remembrance is the tie that binds us to our past and guides each of us for the challenges of the future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.